Welcome back to this video series Working with Scenario Management in Visum and PTV Hub. My name is Anett Ehlert and I'll guide you through the various aspects of scenario management in our software. In this part 4, we will focus on results of scenarios and comparisons of scenarios. So in this part, we focus on result. We have now our 5 scenarios calculated, and we can now open any of the result version. In order to analyze the results, we would like to change graphic parameters, we would like to add views, use filters, and also different lists, and change the layout. All these settings can also be defined as a global layout. And you can integrate global layouts in your scenario management project. Using these global layouts, you can then apply them to the different result versions and see the results under different aspects. As an example, we will add 3 global layouts to our scenario management projects. So one to see private transport results. So for example, the volume capacity ratio. We would like to see passenger volumes, passenger boardings, alightings, and the transfers. And as a third, we use a global layout that shows us the public transport supply. So in order to do so, we switch to global layouts. And add the 3 global layouts, which I already prepared and have been stored under shared data for simplicity. But of course, you can also edit them in the same way as we were showing for example, modifications. So first we start with the PRT results and would like to see the volume capacity ratios. And we used an existing file that I have prepared and open the file and have our global layout integrated. So the same we will do for PT results. So passenger volumes, boardings, alightings, and transfers. And we have a third one with the public transport supply. So if you don't do that immediately, you can also use here the context menu to load an existing layout file. Now that these files are integrated, you can go back to the scenario tab, for example, load this result version of the 5th scenario, and now you can use the global layouts and apply them to that result version. So here, for example, we see the volume capacity ratio and the network editor and also the number in the list. For public transport results, we can see here the passenger volumes. We can see for each of the stop, the boardings, alightings, and passenger transfers. And in addition, we have another view, the transfer display of a specific stop that is located here in the north, which might be of particular interest. And we can also see volumes in the list. So in that way, you can basically add different windows, change the window configuration, and focus on a specific result of your version file. So to compare scenarios, it is useful to define scenario indicators. So that could be, for example, the total vehicle kilometers traveled in the network, the total time traveled, or for public transport, the passenger kilometers. You might be also interested in the convergence statistics. So for example, the gap or the number of iterations. So in our example, we will define 5 scenario indicators. The one I already mentioned, so vehicle kilometer traveled in the network, vehicle hours traveled in the network, the gap, the iterations, and the passenger kilometers. So some of these indicators can be extracted from the PRT assignment quality list. So for example, we open here for scenario 1, this quality list. And we see here some of the indicators that we are interested in. So for example, the number of iterations would be for the scenario 21. We have here the gap, we have here the vehicle kilometers traveled, and the vehicle hours traveled in the network. So that means 4 indicators can be found in this list. And the other one, the passenger kilometers, we will extract from the sum of passengers kilometers over all lists. So scenario indicators can be defined in the basic settings. So here on the right side, you find the entry for scenario indicators. You get access to the attribute selection dialog. And in this dialog, we have relations to the different network objects, and we have also a relation to the private transport assignment quality data, and more specifically to the results in the last iterations over all demand segments. So because there could be several demand segments, there are the aggregation function. In our case, we have only one, so it's basically the same which of these we use. We will use the concatenate. So here we find the iteration, we find the gap, we have here the vehicle kilometers traveled in the network, the vehicle hours traveled in the network. For that, we need to use T current. And as I said, for the passenger kilometers, we use links and the sum, and then passenger kilometers. Okay. And now we have our 5 scenario indicators here. In order to make them more readable, we can use short names. You can select one and then define a short name. So here, for example, vehicle kilometer traveled. For the second one, we use vehicle hour traveled. So that is based on T current. We can also do the same for iteration and gap. And here we have passenger kilometers like that. Okay, now we have defined all our 5 scenario indicators. We can now change to the tab scenarios, and we will see automatically these 5 indicators here at the right side of the table. So maybe we can remove some of the entries here in order to see more, and can also change the settings here. So now we would like to have the scenario indicators calculated. So we can either recalculate all the scenarios, then also these indicators are calculated automatically, or we have also the option to extract these indicators from the existing result versions because they are currently up to date and calculated. So to do so, I use this button, and with this I can calculate the indicators only. So that means the different version files are opened and the values are extracted. So now we have the indicators, and we can look at the results of the scenarios, and that allows us to compare scenarios at a higher level to see, first of all, if the results are reasonable in the first place on that level. So we can see here, for example, the gap is fine for all the scenarios. The number of iterations is reasonable. We have vehicle hours and vehicle kilometers increase with a higher demand. And also for public transport, we see an increase in passenger kilometers with our improved public transport supply. So far that seems all reasonable. So we also would like to compare the scenarios in more detail and show the differences graphically, for example, in the network editor or in lists. So that could be, for example, the volumes for passengers, or for private transport, the volumes of vehicles. So to do so, we can create so-called comparison patterns. So these are essentially templates for comparing two scenarios. So also for that comparison pattern, you need to choose two scenarios, but it's actually irrelevant which ones to use. But of course, it would be of advantage if you know what to expect from the comparison. So we now define comparison patterns, and I would like to show you how that works. So first of all, as I said, we choose two scenarios. The leading scenario is basically the one that will be loaded, and the comparison scenario is the one that we would like to use for the comparison. We then need to define a code for the comparison pattern. So I will use vol prt. So we compare here volumes. And now we edit the comparison pattern. Now you have the choice either to only include some attributes from the comparison network, or to load the comparison network in the background. I would suggest to use the second option, because then you have access to all the attributes automatically and you do not need to select in advance. So what happens now is that our leading scenario, the do something scenario, is loaded, and the base scenario, which we have as a comparison network, is loaded in the background. And now we can start to define the graphic parameters for the network editor. We can open different views. We can add lists and show the corresponding attributes from both scenarios. So what we would like to see here is the difference in volumes. So we change the display of links and change the bar settings to the difference between the leading scenario and the one in the background. So you can access now the attributes of the scenario in the background by using the code of the comparison pattern. So under this code, you find all the attributes of the different network objects, and here in particular for links. So as you can see, you find not only the values, you find some different aggregates here, and we are interested here in the difference. So this network is the one that is loaded. So that was our leading scenario. And the code of the comparison pattern that stands for the scenario that is loaded in the background. So here we are interested in the volume. So instead of scrolling down the attribute list, I will use here the definition. So this gives us the access to the first entry for this network. You do not need to write all the name here, and then we are interested in volumes. So we already see the attributes that are relevant, and we would like to use the volumes PRT. So now we have the difference here selected, and we would like to make a classified display with values below 0 and values above 0. And we will use green and red to indicate that. So now I will also check here the different settings. We have here again the scaling attribute. We will change the bar width and will change to automatic scaling because we would like to apply that to different pairs of scenarios. So we change here the settings for the label. So that will be difference. We do not round the value. And here we have the fill style. And now we can check if that seems reasonable. Yes. So maybe we also remove the bar labels here. And we can also add the legend, remove the links, add the link bars, and change, for example, make the text for the labels bigger and remove the graphical scale. So like that. Okay. For the comparison pattern, you will still see here this network, which will be later on replaced by the code of the leading scenario, and the code of the comparison pattern, vol PRT, will be replaced by the code of the comparison network. So we also add a list because we are interested in the values. So we can arrange the window, and again, we can select the attributes we are interested in. We can again access the attributes of the comparison network via this code here. And here we are also interested in the value for the volume. And we are also interested in the difference, for example. And we can also, for example, in the relative difference, and we can add all these attributes here. So again, that is our template for comparing different pairs of scenarios later on. So now we are finished with this comparison pattern. So we will see now here our comparison pattern, and now we are ready to use this comparison pattern. So we could, for example, compare the base version with the base and the bridge. So the change here is the bridge, the network change. You can compare networks using this icon here. So you choose the leading scenario. In our case, that will be the do something scenario. So that scenario is loaded, and the other one will be the comparison network. And we press compare and see exactly the definition that we have defined before for these two scenarios. Again, so the do something scenario 25 is loaded and is compared to the base scenario. And in the list, we see the values for the do something scenario, that is the one that is loaded. We see here the base value for the base scenario, the difference and the relative difference in percent. So we can compare the values for different links. So we could also add here filter to make our list a bit more readable, but you are free in defining more views, more filters, or different attributes for display in the network editor. So now I would like to do a second comparison pattern that will more or less the same workflow. This time we do it for public transport. So we would like to compare the volumes in the network and maybe look at a different list to see the different passenger kilometers traveled on different line routes. So we proceed this in the same way as before. We are interested in the results of the scenarios. We choose a leading scenario. In that case, that will be our scenario with the improved public transport supply. So where we have added a line route and modified another one. The comparison will be the base scenario. We will add a code, vol PT, and now we can edit the comparison pattern in the same way. Again, I would suggest you load the comparison network in the background. That gives you access to all the attributes of all network objects. So again, we start with the network editor. We change the link display. This time we are interested in the volume public transport and the difference. And again, we can access these attributes using the network that is loaded in the background. We have the values here, but also the differences between the network loaded, this network, and the comparison network. So also here, we use the option in the attribute dialog. We are interested in volume PUT. Again, that is a difference. So you have here the attribute. We are interested in the difference. Change the classification and add only two classes. Change the colors. Make sure that the scaling attribute is the same. We have reasonable settings for the scaling. Automatic scaling is always good if you apply that to different scenario pairs. So make sure that the label is correctly defined. And if you would like to see values, make sure that the text indicates what you would like to see. Okay. So we see the preview and we can already see that volumes have increased here over the bridge along the new line. So we will now also add the legend. change the size of the labels, and possibly also remove here the graphical scale. So, and finally, we add a list with the passenger kilometers for the line routes. So also here we will first remove any attribute that we do not need. We have already the passenger kilometers of the loaded network, so that is our leading scenario. And then we can access other attributes via the code of the comparison network. So first we add value for passenger kilometers. And then we would also like to have the differences between the leading scenario, this network, and the comparison scenario. And we can also add the relative difference and can see the values in the list. So with this, we have created our second comparison pattern. We finish the definition of the comparison pattern, and we are already done with comparison pattern. So what we can finally do is apply the comparison pattern to two scenarios, for example, to the fifth scenario and the base scenario. We can do that via this comparison icon. We choose here the comparison pattern, the leading scenario. Here we choose the fifth scenario and we compare. And now we can see in the network editor the difference. So that is a difference between the do something public transport scenario and the base scenario. And in the list, we can, for example, look at the line routes that we added. For example, here, the bus B20. And you can see that in the base scenario, there is no line route. There are no passenger kilometers for that. And we can also see the difference for the rerouted line route B26. So we see here a difference of 200 kilometers, 200 passenger kilometers that are additionally in the new scenario 5, where we added public transport supply. So, and in the same way, you can apply this comparison pattern to any pair of scenario. And again, it is useful to choose the fifth scenario as a leading scenario because of the fact that this line route B20 is not present in the base scenario. So, and with this, we are at the end of part 4, and I would like to summarize the learnings. We have seen how to use global layouts to display the scenario results of single scenarios. We have then added scenario indicators. We have created scenario indicators and used them to compare scenarios on a very high level. And we have seen how to create and apply comparison patterns to compare two or even more scenarios.